there's a link to the YouTube channel. So yeah, let's get into some stuff. I think one of the things that I talked to Jayme about that she really got excited about, which I thought was a great jumping off point, was about the connection between art and activism and where we see it living in this current moment. I think it's interesting that I see a lot of new ideas as far as activism are coming from artists, but not so much sometimes of their art connected to the activism. It's really them as an individual engaging in activism. So like, just as a jumping off point, like I'll start with you, Jayme. So like, what are you seeing as like the state of connection between art and activism for you?
Um, yeah, like you mentioned, this was something that resonated with me because earlier this year at the start of the pandemic, when the social unrest really started to pop off, I was on a panel conversation with composer Joel Thompson, and he, his work, the
It
seven
looks like we might be having a little bit of a connection problem. Your mic went silent there.
oh, sorry. Is
Yeah.
it better or is it still okay?
Yes, that's better. Yes.
That's better.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so I was saying earlier in the year, I was on a panel conversation with composer Joel Thompson and his work, The Seven Last Words of the Unarmed. And is it still a mic issue?
Yeah, it's making a little bit of a sound. I'll give you 2 seconds
It
and
might
ask.
be vibrating or something, Jayme.
No, it was so let me
It's
see. I
perfect
just
there.
changed my mic. Yeah, I just changed my mic setting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Take three. Okay. So was on a panel earlier this year with composer Joel Thompson, and we were discussing his work, The Seven Last Words of the Unarmed. And it's an orchestral, it calls for orchestra and all male chorus. And he, wrote this piece around the last words of 7 Black men who have been killed by the police.
Mhm.
And he released the work in 2017, and he talked about the type of reception it got. People were asking questions like, well, why are y'all programming this? This is hip hop. It's like, have y'all ever heard, like, this is full orchestra and
Right.
choral piece. But because of the subject matter, people wanted to put it off to the side in hip hop. And, people really had some harsh criticisms about this work. But then we saw its resurgence earlier this year, and to hear his perspective on it was, it's become safer now to engage with his orchestral piece than it is to engage with the conversation of policy change and reform. And that really kind of triggered this conversation for me within, because it's like, depending upon where the pendulum lies, art can be very provocative and can be challenging, right? But then sometimes it's like when you are being called to be about it, it can feel safer, or it can feel easier to, just kind of be with the art and the beauty of the music. Even though the subject matter is a little bit challenging, it's not as raw as engaging with the conversation around defund the police, right? So, so as as a musician, as an artist, as a performer who has used my platform to instigate such, conversations or discomfort, I do find myself saying, at what point does it become enabling?
Right.
Like for you to come over to consume what I'm doing in this space rather than, to actually do the work of reform, especially, in my industry where we got our own stuff,
Right.
that we are talking about and engaging with and transforming. And there's only so much singing I can do about it, and there's only, and I definitely believe that there is a space for
Yeah.
it, as we, you know, create fertile ground, and open hearts and minds to be able to engage. And also we've got to make practical, tangible steps forward that might not look like just buying a ticket to my show.
Right. Royce, I see you making some faces of like I want to hear what you're thinking about what she's
No,
saying.
no, all faces of agreement. But I think it's really interesting because with art, I think art's role is to naturally push people to some action, but I do think there is a level of education that comes with art. So we have to, with what we're doing with Sweet Auburn Stories, our goal is to educate and then inspire to act, right? So like, I want us to make sure that we're always thinking about like, okay, some people genuinely do not know some of the history behind a lot of the movements and a lot of the resentment. Unfortunately, I don't know how you can not know, but some people do not know, maybe for lack of caring or lack of seeking knowledge, but aren't familiar with, and this comes from Black, white, or other, not familiar with the root of the struggle that's going on right now.
Absolutely.
And so I think what we're doing with Sweet Auburn, and I think the art that moves me the most is the art that teaches me first, and then allows me to digest it and then act. So it is extremely important to create that action, but also I think we should give ourselves a little grace for the learning period as well.
Right. So is Jay, that what he just said about, can you give me that list one more time, Reese? You said Royce, the progression that you were discussing.
Yeah, so I was saying, so with art, you have to educate and then inspire to act.
Okay.
Yeah.
So taking that into your experience, Jayme, do you find that there is a breakdown between those steps, or are there not connections between those steps? As far as inspiring and educating.
Yeah, I think one thing that I love about performing is that I feel it's a collaborative experience with the audience, right? So, and that's been one of the biggest challenges during this time. It's like we'll have these online platforms, which is great because we still get to do things, but also I don't have the physical energy of the being present with me, right? So there's this collaborative element, and that requires this willingness to show up. And so I think, and I guess this is with anything, right? With the education, there has to be a willingness to receive the knowledge, right? And then there has to be a willingness to engage with the knowledge,
right?
And there has to be a willingness. Say that again.
As table stakes, right? Like as just a basic thing, right? Like people have to, yeah.
You have to be willing to do that. And so just as it's a collaborative experience for the audience member to be present at the show, and you can feel it when somebody is not really engaged in the audience, when somebody is not there. I feel like it's I think it's that willingness that can be a source of breakdown. And I think that this is where art can help to play that, to fortify that, in being able to move, to move the heart and to move, those different things, to move some stuff out of the way to provide for more willingness. But that's one area that I would say that the breakdown can exist, because like Roy said earlier on, some people just lack the knowledge. And then still you have to ask the question, at some point it becomes a willful ignorance, right? Like when people say, oh, I didn't know about certain things, it's like, how you didn't know?
Right. Right.
And it's possible that you didn't know. So I think that possible breakdown can be a willingness.
Yeah, I wonder if some of that has been born into, if not all of it, is born into the community. Like it's been there from the root as far as how we engage with certain arts, where we engage with certain arts. I was gonna kind of bring this up later, but I feel like we're really kind of at that point now, so I'm gonna, bounce back here in a little bit. One of the things that really engaged me when Royce first started doing Sweet Auburn stories, um, was the sense of place that he was originally hosting it live in person when you could do these things in Sweet Auburn, at this facility that was once WERD radio, which is known to be the first Black radio station. And so, and it's not a very big space. It's not a very, like, easy space to do that kind of thing, but they crammed it in there. And I think that sense of place bridged some of the gaps that we're talking about. And I think it brought people into what was going to go on there who maybe wouldn't have otherwise. So I guess, like, as a follow-up to what I was just asking you, Jayme, is that part of why these breakdowns happen for you, is just where and how your art is experienced?
Definitely, right? Because being a classical musician, being an operatic performer, this happens in a specific space.
Mm-hmm.
And that space typically caters to a specific audience. And this is one of the conversations that we're engaged in right now as a community, right? Because, one can question the intention behind that, right? Like, who is going to the opera? Who is going to the recital hall? And is there even a desire to bridge these gaps, right? To intentionally engage in some of these conversations, I'll say specifically around race, but just in general, these conversations around, human rights that have not typically been engaged, to a transformative degree. Well, I mean, I guess in their time when they were created, they were provocative, but 200, 300 years later, maybe not as much. And that's one of the things that I definitely look at when I'm programming my own stuff, is, you do have to be intentional about, well, who are you talking to? Who do you want to show up? Where are they? And one of the challenges with opera is, are you willing to, this art that has positioned itself so much as elusive or exclusive, like that's what it has built itself off of. And, many argue that it's a dying, art form. And so it's like, are we willing to reimagine ourselves, and to be willing to get out of where we have always been, to go to these places where we can provide that place and space in the visuals, and even communities, within these conversations. I think that space is essential for sure.
It's just so funny how time passes, because my great grandparents, I knew pretty well when they were in their mid upper 90s. And my grandmother actually had a set of opera 78 records. And it wasn't, from my perspective of her interest in it, unusual. It was because, I mean, she came from so far back in history in her youth that it was actually a lot more common music. And I wonder sometimes how we made some of these transitions. Royce, I think you went to Arts High School, right?
Yeah. Tri-Cities.
Did you feel like when you were engaging in that as a young person that there was like a transition you were making in being involved in those things, like knowing all the stuff that we grew up with as kids as cultural touch points in art, like did it feel like going into something else kind of akin to what Jayme was saying in order to do that?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. So in high school, did it fit when I was doing performing arts? Did it feel like going into another space?
Yeah, into say like another culture, into another box, into another.
So no, I mean, I was raised with arts in my household. So it was like I was super familiar with it and I loved it. And I think that's essential to many house. I think that should be an essential element of a household is some sort of infusion of art, because it allows one to question, it allows one to challenge, and I think that's healthy in life. And then it also allows for perspective. I hate homogenous things. I don't like things that look alike. I'm a big fan of diversity in general, thought, color, people, size, everything. But I think what Jayme was talking about with the spaces is incredibly important, and that hits to your point as to why we chose to have Sweet Auburn Stories in this WERD space, because some spaces just are innately sacred, right? Like the opera house to the opera, I imagine, and I unfortunately haven't been to a live opera. I'm surprised, but I want to go. But I think that, that space as an artist has to feel like a sacred space. And I know when you're doing theater, when you go into certain theater, that's a sacred space. But I also think that during these times, we're presented with such an invaluable opportunity to innovate around art as well. And so things like what we're doing now is, incredible, because you don't have to, you reduce the barrier of entry for people and allow people to engage in conversation and art like they haven't been before. I mean, if I look at, while we did Sweet Auburn at WERD Studio, it was great and super well attended. I think it helped to establish the vibe of kind of like this old world storytelling, very sacred space moment. When we've done them digitally, it allows us to connect to so many other people and touch so many other places and types of people that I think is essential to art as well. And I do think as we continue to grow our art as artists and anyone who's pushing that culture forward, I do think we need to think about some sort of a digital component, even if we do host the art in a sacred space and some space that is essential for that art to live. I think that digital has to be some sort of component. And then you work to find partners digitally that can help you cross those barriers into whether it's underserved communities or, populations with women that are being oppressed, or wherever you want your art to touch. Right. You can do that with this digital medium that now we're forced to do. So I'm super happy with that.
Well, that actually makes me want to ask you a question, Jayme. Do you see in some of the stuff you've been doing since the pandemic started that there is a broader audience or a broader connection for the work, or has it stayed kind of in its similar silo?
Oh, I think there's definitely potential. What I heard Royce saying, I heard two major themes, is that intention and access.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in ways in which we have not been intentional about, the audience or expanding the audience, we are allowed to or required to really at this point, and providing this access to people who, have not been able to get to the opera house or really have not had access and have not had that interest, ignited, so now, because it is so much more readily available, I think that we've got people showing up who may not have normally. I know, like family, I'm from California, I'm living in Atlanta, but, I've got family who now can view performances, whereas they can't fly to Atlanta to see me, perform as often.
Right.
Stuff like that. So I think that with that intention and with that access has come you know, an audience who didn't know, or who there was that barrier to entry, right? So whether it be the location, whether it be the cost of the ticket, whether it be, you know, not seeing themselves and not really feeling like they had access, or that it would speak to them, you know, they have a space now to consider something new, you know, at a relatively low risk. You know, they're not having to spend however much on a ticket and go to the opera. They can, you know, check it out at home and see that, okay, this is something that is interesting to me.
And I think that the representation of performers of color is an enormous thing. I did a program for a few years at the center called World Music Day, where we would have performers performing different kinds of music from around the world. And the last year we did it, we had a friend of yours, Jayme, Angelica Harrison, come,
Yes.
and she played for a lot of kids from Georgia Cyber Academy, like some pretty young, some kind of, you know, middle school age, and just the looks on their faces to see this, like, you know, smiley, you know, beautiful Black woman playing this harp was just like the weirdest thing. They were looking at her like she was from outer space, and she knows it and she receives it like she teaches. So she knows that's kind of part of where they're at. And then once they get to that point, they can dive into the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those kind of non-traditional spaces are a big deal.
Can I speak on that really quickly too?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that I also think, I mean, that's important. And the point I just want to underscore is that youth component, because I think that art has to, if we look at movements and if we're thinking about how art influences movements, and if we're thinking about catalysts to movements, whether it's a presidential election or some sort of other movement that we're, you know, policy change, movements are galvanized by youth. And so, I mean, across culture. And I think we have to continue to think about, and maybe it is with this digital component. I think people in the arts are being forced to think about the youth, probably in the opera world even more. That was not the audience, youth, you know, you all weren't going to market to like people who go out and hang out on Edgewood, right? Like, you know, or whoever, you know, kids or whatever. Like, I think that, you know, I think that that is such an important component to art that has the role of inspiring change. Is, to me, those are not separate. You have to inspire change, and the way to do that, one of the tried and true ways, is connecting with youth and planting that seed, because youth have the energy for change. Youth have the energy, they have the voice, they have the loudest voice, and they don't have inhibitions. And so
They have the audacity.
They have the audacity, exactly. And so that is what, you know, if I think about what we're trying to do with Sweet Auburn, it really is bringing an old world story and sitting down with someone who's a grandmother or a great grandfather or whomever and going, yo, the reason you can go hang out on Edgewood or go hang out on Auburn and go drink or whatever is because of this person here, and making it very real. And that connection is so important.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yes, I'm already taking notes on that. We're gonna do that opera on Edgewood. I feel it. Let's take that up.
Well, I have a story about that in terms of, you know, engaging with youth. I have one of my dear friends, Babatunde Akimboboye. He, you know, we studied opera together in college, and he's gone this route where he's now known as like the hip hopper guy. So he is combining opera and hip hop. And he, you know, kind of went viral. His claim to fame was he was in his car and recorded himself singing, you know, Figaro's aria to Kendrick Lamar's, oh man, why can't I think of the beat right now?
Oh, I know. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Humble.
That's what I'm talking about.
But he recorded this opera aria over the beat to Humble. Just like millions of views, right? And so, he's been basically, combining this genre of music to where, and he's based in California, to where a group of elementary schools in Georgia got together to bring him out because the kids, a couple teachers started to play that video in the class. And the kids went crazy, crazy. So I went with him, I was helping him out going to visit the different schools and everything. And so, you talk about the faces, the looks on their faces to see this Black man that they saw, they saw on the internet, he was YouTube famous, and he's in front of them singing with his classical operatic training to this beat that they know. And to where, like, you got the kids who are like, Figaro, 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 and they're singing, these Italian words, and the all of the ways and very, ethnically diverse in the schools that we went to, and that they all were able to connect in some way to it and have transformed their way of learning around having been exposed to this, transform their home lives, because many of their parents are like, my kid makes me play this on repeat, and so being able to bring these things together, we cannot underestimate the power of this representation, and to because it was mentioned earlier, like, kids are not really the audience for opera. But it can be, because somebody, someone asked the question earlier. It's like, what are operas that kids love? And I remember, I was studying opera. My daughter was 2. And her first opera that she saw, I was in Gianni Schicchi. And it's a very silly, playful, relatively short opera. And she loved it. I was barely in it, so it wasn't me. she just loved the show. And so I think that there, again, that as Royce points out, the youthful engagement is essential, for the growth of for the sustaining of our art forms, and also for the expansion of them, for those reasons that Royce mentioned. Their energy, they've got more dynamic ways of thinking, because they're just kids, so they just see, they see it the way they see it. They're not completely, they've not been completely swayed by what has always been and the way it's supposed to be, in that sense.
Well, but Royce, did you want to say something about what she just said, or do you
No.
It's interesting sometimes how much is going on, and sometimes in slightly different corners and slightly different school districts or different states or whatever, but that people aren't really aware, and they don't necessarily always rise to a certain level of attention. Like I was just speaking about Angelica. A lot of people probably don't know that she had an in-school program for years teaching kids harp. Very few people would know about that. Jayme, you created a program teaching kids how to create their own protest songs or spiritual songs. Which one is it? Is it spiritual?
We would teach kids about spirituals. It was called Tapestry through the Atlanta Opera. And we teach kids about spirituals and the structure, and then they, in essence, take their own experiences and create their own, and freedom songs. Yes.
So what is it that's keeping these kind of efforts at a level of obscurity? What is it that we need to do so that everybody, is aware of these things? Because obviously, to the point of your friend and coming to Atlanta to do these performances, without access to something like that, you're not going to ask for it. So do you guys have thoughts about like what we need to do, particularly you as a mother, Jayme? Like what do we need to do to make these vital things accessible enough that people seek them out and we can expand this work?
That's a great question.
I have a thought. I think we need to really. I think one, it's funding to artists and like, because artists have ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, often, you know, artists have ideas for days,
Mm-hmm.
but artists don't have money. And so, you know, I think we really need to make more valiant efforts to give artists money and let them do what they do. And I mean money at scale, right? Like create and run a program here, and don't make the barrier to entry for artists that difficult to get the money either. And I say that because it takes money to create programs, to create relationships, to do all these things. But like, I think that, you know, really putting a financial push behind key artists to create programs at scale, whether it's through the school systems, or something along after school programs. And I know that's done, but it's not, there's not like a consistent kind of thing. It's kind of done in these little silos with, you know, and then certain people get certain things, but it's not like mirror. I really think that, and I hope with kind of what COVID has done, will really allow people to give artists more opportunity to create what programs digitally or what have you. But I think it's really like allowing artists to do what they want to do, but also tasking them with the task of like, let's do it at scale to get this in the schools and implement this a little better. I'm not a parent yet, but you know.
Well, if you had a magic wand, Jayme, like, what is that the answer to taking your program and making it, you know?
Well, I was going to say, as an artist, I say, amen, Royce. You know, go ahead and I have plenty ideas, you know, and to have those ideas funded. The thing that came to me immediately when you asked the question is around valuing. Because the arts have consistently, here in this country, we have consistently, you know, had to struggle with proving the value of what we offer. And it does get tied into that connection with resources and money and access. And so I think that there's, you know, we have to value what, you know, what Babatunde is doing, what I'm doing, what Angelica's doing, what Royce is doing. We've got to value it in a way that we say, well, let me make sure, you know, and with that value again comes this word intention. So that, you know, that which we value, we're going to seek out, or that which we value, we're going to put out front, you know, so that it's not just kind of oh, let me check this off the box, you know, as something, you know, to pacify, you know, but that it really becomes, you know, you prioritize it. You prioritize it.
And I kind of wonder too if it isn't just sort of an anti-creative sort of environment sometimes, you know, because the power of arts for kids is that entryway into a tangible creativity in the kind of next phase of their life. Because as like toddlers and babies and stuff, they're very creative and very imaginative, and that it's just sort of indelible. And then once you start going into school, you start forming more into this more structured, rigid person. And I think continued arts education taps back into that creativity. And I sometimes feel like there's just not a lot of focus on creativity, but in kind of any circumstance you can imagine in your life, in society, there's always a creative element. You know, like when people talk about like, you know, we didn't have any food in the house, but we were hungry, so that's inherently creative. You had a problem, and you went through some process to solve it. And that's, and I think that art's opportunity grows that, you know. But I think another thing that
I'd like to say, you know, around this conversation, around creativity, right? Because then, as you know, that goes back into this overall conversation of activism and activating, right? Because then it's like when we value and when we nurture creativity and, you know, coming up with these solutions as you described in your example, that doesn't just look like visual arts or music, you know, or film, but it, you know, just looks like this ability to create something other than what has been, to create something new, to create a new way. This is what activism calls for. You know, activism says we've identified something that needs to change and we want to be that change. And so I think that to nurture this creative element in youth and in adults, you know, facilitates this ability to be able to see things from a new framework.
I sometimes wish, like in these programs, that I could connect the screen with the conversation going on, because if you're not like looking over there to see what the conversation is going on, it's actually really valuable. But I would just encourage everybody to check in here and actually read through some of the things that have been discussed, because I think it's really really helpful. Well, let me shift gears a little bit to talk about kind of like the actual business of what's going on now, briefly. Jayme, just like kind of in general, like how are you feeling about your business and where it's, you know, going in the wake of COVID? I don't think a lot of people know much about what artists have going on in their day-to-day lives right now, and it's not necessarily top of mind to consider it.
So I've always been very entrepreneurial in my approach to doing my art. And so really I have been immersed in pivoting.
Right.
Really. So you talked about Tapestry. So that's a program that I co-created with my friend and colleague Brittany Boykin, and you know, for the Atlanta Opera. And so that's a program that we would go into the schools and, you know, either perform as an assembly, or we would, you know, we could do it as a classroom or residency program. And so now we've shifted it to make it virtual friendly. And, you know, as Roy said, you know, I mean, it's actually, it works great for this kind of a platform, because it does make it more widely accessible. You know, I can only go so many places in a day at one time, right? But virtually, it does make it possible for me to do more. So it's just been a lot of pivoting. And as a creative, just, you know, allowing these new ideas to come up in a way that makes it possible to engage in this climate. A lot of reconsidering place. So, you know, outdoor options.
In the coming months, like concerts outside.
Exactly. Concerts outside. You know, making sure that we're able to, and because again, the operatic classical voice, we usually are not mic'd. And so now having to adjust to a new place, you know, I'm learning. I always say I feel like somebody's auntie because I'm learning all of these, you know, all of these new technical devices. So I mean, it's a lot of pivoting, but it invigorates me, and you know, it is a part of the challenge is bringing the audience with you, and or finding who your new audience is.
Right. I mean, they aren't necessarily the same, but you kind of desire them to be, right? You hope in the future they become the same audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Royce, on a more of marketing side with your company, you know, a fairly new company, like how is it going? Like how have things shifted? How have
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
developed?
things have definitely shifted. On the partnership side of the business, we went from working with, you know, brands to put them with festivals or live events. So like we might work on a deal with, I'll use Toyota as an example, Toyota and A3C or One Music Fest, and have them sponsor a stage or whatever, a live event. That is no longer happening. So in the spirit of pivoting, like Jayme was saying, we've had to pivot and create digital programs and opportunities to do it, you know, and to create like digital concerts, right? Which is really cool. And it actually reached a ton of people and accomplished client goals and that. On the production side of the business, where we're producing things like Sweet Auburn Stories, I think you kind of have to go into it in a way to pivot as well. Like as soon as we found out we weren't able to do physical events, I reached out to a company to figure out how we can make this a digital, you know, some sort of a digital platform. And they actually did digital conferences. And then we put brand dollars behind it to help us amplify that. So I think as an artist, you always have to be pivoting. You know, I think the artists that do well are those that have that artist and that entrepreneurial brain, because you can always, you know, pivot and figure out a way. But it was rocky at first. But I'm definitely seeing more pickup now from brands, from other funding sources. Companies out there have money for artists. Google, Facebook, these are all companies that have created funds specifically for artists to create things, and artists of color to create things. So I think like tapping into those resources as well. I'm also all about taking brand money because they get my money all the time. So I don't want people to like forget that.
Yeah, I mean there is an aspect, I think, in our culture that challenges that idea because there's like this sort of like selling out like concept. But at the same time, um,
Uh-oh. Did we lose him?
We got a little.
Yeah, he might have frozen, but I think that you know, it's really interesting in this time, like how everyone's had to pivot, right? Like, and how everyone's had to pivot from like, okay, we were doing things in person and events were going on, and then we've literally had to pivot into almost an exclusively digital space. I'm a fan of it right now just because of the transition period that I'm in. I'm like, yeah, great.
the kind of the holes we've been talking about, corporate.
Here we go. Oh, he'll be back.
Yeah, we lost him. But you know, have you been a fan of the kind of digital experiences?
I have, for the most part. I love innovation,
Right.
and I love, you know, a new thing. Like
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of a new thing.
Yeah.
I You know, I've personally been just going through my own, like I said, with this, you know, with everything that has been happening, especially with the social uprisings. I've been with my own personal experience as far as my particular art form is. Like, you know, I've gone through this stage where like I don't feel like watching an opera right now.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you know, especially when there's this feeling of disconnect.
Right.
When, you know, and someone asked in the comments, they said, you know, can we change some art forms like opera to speak more directly to the concerns of young people and then the people, particularly people of color? And, you know, during this time, these things have become so amplified, right? Like we're telling the same stories about the same people. And, you know, Black people and people of color have been forced to kind of conform to this Europeanized standard.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in that. anymore. So that's also been part of the pivot that I've been interested in. Like I've personally not been interested in the traditional conversations as far as opera's been concerned, but I have been excited to see some of the transformative thinking and conversations that have been coming forward, the calls to program more Black composers, to, you know, make the opera houses and the opera stages and administration look like, you know, some of our most diverse cities. And you mentioned how you're such a big fan of diversity. It's like it's really essential. Like if you don't want to be monochromatic in what you're presenting, you've got to have people who think and look different. So I've been seeing those conversations come up, and just my own personal, you know, creative juices have been flowing in this space. And I have enjoyed having, you know, I've learned how to use the ring light,
right.
You know, and bringing these things as other tools for creation.
Right.
And watching how other people are doing, like, you know, on Instagram, you got the whole verses thing that rose up. That was like, this is amazing. Like it's become a whole thing now, you know, where we get to see these legends or these people who have been impactful in music on this new platform. So I've been enjoying that.
Yeah, same. You're mute, David.
I think I'm back.
We just been talking.
Yeah, so I was just saying that I think that's a really vital connection between corporate donorship money and the furthering of arts causes for certain. I kind of wanted to ask you both to sort of to put on sort of like the legislator hat or the civic leader hat, and kind of tell me something that you have on the shelf that in those kind of roles you could move off and bring forward, because, you know, we really wanted to touch upon action as much as ideas here. So just as kind of like a something to leave people with, is just an idea. Not that I'm not going to steal opera on Edgewood, because that's definitely for real happening. Looking for that announcement soon.
Just make sure you call me. You know, I'll say an initiative that we've just initiated and that I'm actively involved with is Black Opera Alliance. Is an organization that has been birthed out of this time. And, you know, as we've seen with different industries, people have come forth and, you know, put forth a call to action for their specific industry. And so we just a couple days ago released an open letter and a call to action for those who are in opera, who enjoy opera, who might enjoy opera in the future, who have any level of investment to sign and to partner with these really these minimal demands, right? Because we've gotten to this point of realization that we have been operating in a very toxic environment. And so we listed about 10 things that are necessary in order to transform that. And that includes making sure that your concert stages, that your opera stages reflect the most diverse cities in America, making sure that the administrative, stagecraft, technical support teams all represent the diversity of our most diverse cities.
Right.
You know, so that is an initiative that I would, I mean, of course, it's very, you know, specifically focused, but that I would advocate for because it's, again, it's just a microcosm of the greater conversations. It's just what's happening in the opera world. But
Yeah.
but
But
to
I don't
look at
think
these
that the
initiatives.
specificity of it takes anything away from it. I mean, like I say, I think those traditional forms of art really do need that infusion of new voices, and you do that through bringing equity to how it functions and exposing it to young people. So I think that's a really awesome effort, and I'm really glad to see that that's a positive that's come out. And if you could send me the link for that, I'm going to add it to the resources for this program.
I
Royce,
definitely
you're
will.
in charge.
That's a loaded question.
It is.
That's big, and
You're
I think
big. You're right.
but I think that the thing that leaders have the most power to control, and the thing that really moves things in this country,
Mm-hmm.
funds and money. And so I realized that with, when I think about when I was listening to I think it was Bob Johnson talking about reparations, and he was like, yo, we need a wealth transfer. And like, I was like, okay, that is the foundation of this country. And as a legislator, I need to be able to work to transfer or to reallocate funds to places that allow the barrier to art to be broken down. Right. And like that, and I'm not as familiar with all of the arts funding, but whether that's like, free scholarships to attend Alliance classes for, so many people, free scholarships for students to go to Atlanta Opera training and classes, private voice lessons, like people in low income communities. If art is a real priority from an artist perspective, I think it is. If people in low income and underserved communities could get transportation, access, mentorship to these high art forms, to open their minds to new things, new ways of thinking, and also the ability to challenge and create art on their own that challenges, I think that's a key thing. Because as a legislator, really what you're doing, you're creating laws, you're doing all of this, but what you're really doing is you're shuffling money around to fund programs that are on your agenda, right? And so to me, as a legislator, that is your most powerful tool in this country, to be able to allocate money that allows that barrier to be broken down. Because the reason why some people can't go to things, and the reason why kids can't do certain things or be exposed to certain things, is just a lack of access. It's not a lack of aptitude. So
I love it. I love it. So we're gonna wrap up here. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining us. Unfortunately, our third panelist could not make it. He is the creator of Forward Warrior, the art painting group that has their mural painting festival this weekend. And I think he just ran out of time and couldn't make it. But if you see the Krog Street Tunnel, or you see the murals on Wiley Street, they will be out there today and tomorrow, I believe, and I think Sunday as well, painting, so check that out. In the resources, I just wanted to mention there's a program for a new national association of independent music venues. In the time of COVID, there is a real disaster going on with these very thin margin, small businesses, really about to go under. And so this is a brand new initiative to link all these folks together. And it's actually not just music institutions, there's also comedy theaters, and I think there actually is an opera theater in the group. But anyway, so to give them a voice in lobbying and in legislation to hopefully get some funds to help recover. So that's just one of several resources that we have listed on there. New programs for Campaign for Equal Dignity come out every week. So please check back with us about new programs. This is a description of the weekly checklist, what we're asking you to do in connection with the program. We appreciate that. Again, thank you so much to Jayme and Royce for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye, Jayme. Nice meeting you.
It was nice meeting you too, Royce.
Take it easy,
Thanks for
David.
having me, David.
Thank you so much.